I'll call on you.
Okay.
Yeah, just, I'm also very sensitive and sympathetic, of course, to, this notion of that there are applications that are latency sensitive, like gaming, voice over IP, some, maybe interactive HD streaming video. And I'm assuming that that's, that what's going to take care of that to a great degree is that category within the proposed rules that I mentioned, which just hasn't been, in a sense, defined yet well enough, which is managed and specialized services. In other words, where certain things where there is a good reason to do it, it's a special service, it needs special treatment, and it's carved out, in a sense, from the general treatment of everything else. But we do have to worry that, where that prioritization of delivery of bits is most relevant is in the presence of congestion, right? And I think we should be very concerned that, whenever you prioritize some bits, you almost necessarily degrade others in terms of their delivery. And Rob mentioned Canada before, and they actually probably, I would agree they probably do have a model that's really worth looking at. But what's interesting is the Canadian FCC, what they stated as the underlying philosophy of their net neutrality rules, which are mostly case by case, okay? But what they said is that they want to have an incentive for more capacity, not scarcity. So if there is a prioritization that goes on in Canada, then the burden shifts to the provider to go in and show that A, that this is essential, and B, that they're using the least restrictive means. And that helps, that sort of formulation really helps to avoid the kind of cases you can imagine when you read, as this morning's front page, right, that Comcast merging with NBC. Well, there's a lot of concern, for example, that Comcast, which is one out of every 4 cable customers, would have a strong self-interest to prioritize the streaming video from sites like Hulu or programming that it owns through NBC in the future. And that means by prioritizing those streams that maybe some other streams have hiccups.
Okay. I'm going to let Dr. Atkinson rebut, and then I'll come to you, Pete.
I know, by the way, this gets this can get really technical and very quickly. But let me just say a couple things on the prioritization. If you prioritize your VoIP, or your provider prioritizes your VoIP, and your email arrives 50 milliseconds late, do you really care? So if your email arrives half a second late, so that your voice service or your interactive medical service with your doctor, do you really care? And the answer is no, you don't care. So there are certain applications it doesn't matter if they arrive a 50 milliseconds or even 100 milliseconds, which is 1 second, late. And that's what we're talking about. Some of these prioritizations, by the way, don't degrade anything at all. They just chop up the bits in a more efficient way. So it's not just about a bigger pipe. I mean, we just wrote a report here called Design for Change, which is on our website, and I think by an engineer, by the way. And the key point there was that there are some applications that still require management, even with 100 megabits. So if you look at the Japanese, for example, the member talked about the 100 megabits there. They use prioritization in Japan, even with 100 megabit pipes. Last point I'll just make with Michael's point about specialized services. To me, that's sort of a reason to not do a heavy-handed net neutrality rule, because if only the ISPs can do specialized services for their VoIP and the Skypes of the world can't get that service, then they're at a big disadvantage. So if we're only going to say that the ISPs can manage their particular things and no one else can get that better service, then I think that can be a risk to innovation.
Pete, we got to you.
Thank you. I asked the commissioner when he was here, but it always seems to me that the heavy hand of federal government tends to block things. But do you think more federal regulation or less federal regulation will help expand the internet and broadband and so forth?
Dr. Atkinson.
Well, I have a sort of little ditty that I say, we got 3 choices. We can regulate, abdicate, or facilitate. And I would argue for the latter. I don't, in this particular case, though, in some ways I think that's maybe the wrong question, because I don't think it's a question of sort of nothing or regulation. I think it's a question of giving the FCC, making clear from a statutory perspective that the FCC has authority to act, and then letting them act on a case-by-case basis. Now, is that regulation or more intervention? It absolutely is more intervention. It's basically saying we are going to stop abuses. I think that is the role of the FCC, to stop abuses. Now, my own view is there haven't been a lot of abuses. Frankly, I'm on the other side of the Comcast case. I didn't think that was an abuse. I think they didn't do a very good job of how they talked about it or publicized it, but the actual technology was not a problem. So, I don't know, is that more regulation? I don't know. My worry, though, is that a more prescriptive kind of regulation would be overly restrictive and limit innovation, but I do think very strong oversight is an important component.
Mr. Calabrese?
Yeah, I mean, this is it almost becomes semantics in some ways, because, as Rob said, it's going to be one way or the other. The other word, either you're going to have rules that are, descriptions, somewhat more detailed descriptions about what's permissible or not, or a lot of case by case. I mean, I tend to think actually that I'd like to be in between, but that the relying strictly on a case by case is going to lead to less certainty, a lot more wrangling, political wrangling over the shape of this as the years go on, and that we might be better off just, in other words, it becomes regulation one way or the other, whether it's clear from the beginning or it sort of accumulates slowly on a case-by-case basis, and that we may be better just to try to make things as clear as possible without being prescriptive, too overly prescriptive as to, what things, what forms of network management exactly, providers need to do.